Hi, I'm Sean, and for today's video, we're going to talk about trauma. We're going to define trauma, we're going to explore a little bit about the impact that trauma has on our mind and our bodies, and then we're also going to give a couple analogies of like what trauma kind of looks like, and then we're also going to talk very briefly about healing, what happens after the trauma. So trigger warning, possibly some of the examples we bring up in this video might cause a little bit of a feeling towards some things, but let's get into trauma. So what is trauma? Trauma is something that shocks the system. So it kind of changes the way that we perceive ourselves, our relationship to ourselves and others, as well as sometimes our relationship to ourselves and the environment around us. So trauma impacts ourselves, people around us, and also the environment kind of triggers that might happen as well. So the important thing to notice is that when we talk about trauma, we can also relate it to things that shape us. So we talk about memory as well. But when we talk about specifically trauma, what we're talking about is things that impact us, they kind of prevent us from living our full lives. They make us more avoidant, they make us a little more fearful, they make us more impulsive. So that's the kind of part about trauma that we're talking about. So as I'm going through this video and we talk about trauma, it's going to look like it's just memories and narratives, but it's more specifically around those memories and narratives that impact us, that make us want to avoid, shelter, isolate, and it's more of a fear and impulsive sort of reaction where we can't kind of regulate our emotions. So some examples of trauma, because trauma has a wide spectrum to it, but one more like kind of subtle form of trauma might be, an example is like, imagine like a kiddo kind of like running to go play outside, and maybe they trip and they kind of like fall before they get outside, or they kind of hit the screen door not realizing that it was closed. The next time the child wants to go outside to play, they might hesitate before they kind of run outside. They have a memory of something that happened, and it kind of shapes the way that they're going to react and respond in future examples. So that's like a subtle form of trauma. And then we go all the way to like other forms of trauma too, which, God forbid, it might be like an accident happens. So the next time you get in a car, whether you're driving or a passenger in the car, you might get very, very fearful, a fear of flying because if something might happen that has happened. But it's important to note that with trauma, there's layers to it. And what I mean by that, it's not just what happens to us in our own experiences. Sometimes trauma is also what we hear from things around us. So what I mean by that is one form of trauma can be I'm in the car and I experience a car accident. Whoever's fault it is, I hit the car hit me, and airbags come out. It's a little bit more of a shock to my system. But trauma can also look like somebody telling me driving is very dangerous, showing me images of cars having accidents, them giving me their own kind of life recollection and reflection about how their interactions with an accident kind of went. So I can experience it myself, or I can kind of take it on by somebody else experiencing it and telling me about it. Both of these things kind of impact us. Both of them can be labeled as trauma, but again, just to reiterate, trauma has different layers and sections to it. When we talk about trauma, we're talking about specifically something that makes me avoidant of something in life. So I won't get in the car next time because someone told me it's scary. Other forms of trauma can also look like people telling us a region is dangerous, a certain neighborhood, a certain country, certain classes, certain people are dangerous. Without us having our own experience with those people, we take other people's words for it. And so now I might avoid traveling to these certain countries. I might avoid interacting with a certain socioeconomic class, a certain race, a certain gender. It's not just me being fearful and not knowing and something different than me, but it's also feeling like these people are out against me. So as we're talking about trauma, it's important to note that I'm talking about a specific degree of trauma, but there's a huge spectrum of trauma. There's experienced trauma, there's trauma that somebody else tells you about it, and there's also trauma that we pick up on just our environment and through media, through the news, whatever it may be, about people telling us that we should be fearful, we should be avoidant to kind of not get too up close to certain things. So with that being said, everyone reacts to trauma differently as well. Trauma can look like, a certain attachment style you have with a parent or a caretaker or a caregiver. Growing up, if they were verbally abusive, physically, something like that, or if they were under the influence of substances or something like that, my attachment to my caregiver can also set up some sort of cell trauma where I see people differently and my narrative of myself and my relation to others gets impacted as well. Besides attachment, trauma can also, we can respond differently to it with regards to grief and loss. Grief and loss, or any adjustment or change or shock to the system, can create some sort of trauma. But what I'm just trying to express is that everyone deals with, responds, and trauma impacts everybody a little bit differently. Because what trauma does, in a sense, is it creates a shock to the system where it reboots, resets, or it creates a huge fork in the system. So a disconnect. So when that happens, an example of that would be if somebody was robbed on the streets. So they're walking through and somebody comes and steals their purse, their wallet, their watch, whatever it may be. Somebody might react to that. You know, the cops show up or a friend asks them what happened. Somebody might respond to that and go, black shoes, red shirts, long hair, short hair, almost like a vivid memory of it because time kind of slowed down. It kind of made everything kind of seem detached, unreal, nothing kind of like, because slowing things down. So in that moment, my body and my mind reacted differently to trauma than, let's say, for example, somebody who experiences the same thing, getting mugged, robbed on the street, walking through. Somebody comes up, says, give me your wallet, your watch, your purse, whatever it may be. That person, when a friend asks them or the cops show up, goes, what happened? They might go, it happened so quick, I don't remember anything. So that's a subtle example of how we can see that with trauma, we respond differently and we also it can imprint us differently as well. So I experience somebody robbing me. I either remember everything or I remember nothing. Time slows down, or it's such a fearful response that it shuts me down and I almost go out of myself. And then once I'm back, time's passed by and I don't realize what happened. So this is an important thing to note because what we're going to talk about right now is the different parts of the brain that get impacted when trauma happens. So there is a book called The Trauma Treatment Toolbox by Dr. Jennifer Sweeten, which highlights 5 different parts of the brain that get impacted when trauma occurs or happens to us. So I want to go over those 5 different parts of the brain because they're crucial in understanding of how trauma impacts us. So to just review them, and then we'll get into a little bit of detail about them, but it's the insula, the cingulate cortex, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. These 5 parts of the brain get impacted when trauma happens to us. So let's talk about each of these parts of the brain and how it impacts us in relation to ourselves, the environment around us, the people around us, our ability to regulate ourselves, our memory, and our ability to be present in the moment. So in no particular order, but let's talk about the insula first. So when the insula gets impacted with trauma, what the insula does, very briefly, does more, but it's our relation to ourself and our environment, more specifically, the way that we know we're standing upright, lying down, when people are kind of like a little bit around us. That's what the insula kind of does. It gives us, you close your eyes, you know which direction you're facing, you know if you're lying down, standing on your feet, you park your car somewhere, you exit your car, you go into the mall, shopping center, whatever, and you close your eyes, you kind of have a rough estimate or direction to where your vehicle is in relation to yourself. That's what the insula does. The cingulate cortex is our ability to regulate our emotions. So when something happens to me, how basically, in other words, how long can I sit with the stress? How long can I let the information from the outside or the information from the inside not overwhelm and short circuit the system? So the cingulate cortex is more aligned with, briefly, more than that, but emotion regulation. Then we have the amygdala. If you remember from our previous videos, the amygdala is what perceives threat. It's that response that maybe we've heard of before, that you freeze, you run away, you fight, or you appease. You might bargain. So this is what tells me I should be aware or afraid of something around me. But remember, the amygdala is a very impulsive sort of thing. So if that hijacks your brain, and that's the only part of your brain which is leading, which we'll get into about trauma, then we're kind of more impulsive and we're not present in the moment. We're kind of making a action or a reaction based upon a hologram or past. We'll get into that in just a moment. Another part of the brain is our hippocampus. So maybe we've heard it before. If there's a hippo on campus, you remember, but your hippocampus is your memory. But what I mentioned about this is, more importantly, it's your inability to store new memory. So you'll kind of go to past previous memories to have a reaction or a memory based upon that. And if we remember from our previous videos, the hippocampus and the amygdala sit right next to each other. So if I'm impulsive and my memory is from trauma focus, from something in the past that happened, I'm not really making a action or reaction to something in the present moment. I'm scanning my mind, going back to a memory, having that be projected, and I'm reacting in that way. Another thing is the prefrontal cortex. So it's a few different things in the front of the brain, but the prefrontal cortex is what kind of reins in the amygdala, kind of calms it down a little bit. So the prefrontal cortex is our decision making. So these 5 parts of the brain, when trauma happens to it, we can see how trauma impacts how we perceive ourselves and the environment around us and the people around us, and our ability to regulate our emotions. Our memory gets a little bit hazed, and our response, impulsive to decision making, also gets kind of blurred. So let's get a little bit more into some examples of these things. So let's explore these 5 areas of the brain that we just spoke about a little bit more in detail with regards to relating it to an example. So this example that I'm going to present, remember, everyone deals with and experiences and reacts to trauma a little bit differently, depending on how it's stored. Remember, we get avoidant, or sometimes we get more, that our memory kind of kicks up. So we either shut down or whatever. But let's use an example of what we kind of talked about previously about me walking down the street and somebody coming and taking something from me. So whether it's my wallet, my purse, my watch, whatever it may be, let's say somebody robs me. So walking down the street, a path that I've normally walked many times before, same time of the day and everything. On this specific day, somebody comes up to me that I obviously don't know. They come up to me and they demand something from me. Let's say they have something on them as well too. Whatever that might be. Let's say they have a weapon. So in that moment, whatever, I freeze, I blank out, I might fight them, I might run away, I might try to bargain with them. Hey, listen, like I'll give you this instead. Don't, leave my life alone, or whatever it is. Whatever the reaction is, now that experience happened and I store it. So now let's fast forward a little bit to talk about these different 5 parts of the brain and how it impacts us afterwards. So I'm walking down the street, and it's the same street that I was walking down a week ago, a day ago, a month ago, that I was mugged, robbed, whatever the label is. As I'm walking down the street, my senses start to kick in. So I start realizing my insula fires and goes, oh, look at you. You're walking some familiar area, the vicinity, your relation to your environment around you kind of looks familiar. Something's starting to happen. My amygdala kicks in with my hippocampus and it goes, Sean, you remember the last time this happened? Do you remember what happened last time? What's going on? What if it happens again? Anticipate it, look for it, be vigilant, be hyperactive, really kind of be looking at your environment and what's going on around you. Then my prefrontal cortex goes, hey, I'm here to make decisions, but you know what? This amygdala is firing so loudly that I yield. It seems like something is really going on right now that's threatening our lives. So prefrontal cortex goes, I help you make decisions, but our decision making is a little bit more like balanced, a little more laid back. That dude down there, the amygdala, that's the one that's going to keep you alive. Because last time this happened, you made it out alive, so do that again. So almost in a way, the prefrontal cortex yields, kind of taps out, goes, check in with that amygdala. The amygdala goes, yes, check in with me. And the memory goes, yes, check in with both of us, the hippocampus. And the hippocampus goes, Don't worry about what's happening now. Worry about what happened. So that's our disconnect, remember. So that's our memory. So the amygdala goes, yes, checkbox, got the hippocampus working with me. Prefrontal cortex has yielded itself. Then it looks like the singular cortex. Remember, the ability for us to regulate our emotions. And singular cortex goes, I don't think this is a time to regulate ourselves because there might be something life-threatening happening. We'll process this afterwards. But right now, I flow with everybody else as well, and I yield to that amygdala. The amygdala goes, perfect. I kept us alive last time. The different parts of the brain, they're all kind of out of the way, and now I can take over and react. So I'm walking through that part of the street again. I sometimes might hear familiar sounds. A voice might be happening. I smell something. So now we get into senses. And there's something important to mention about the senses as I'm walking through this part of the street. So with our senses, we talk about seeing something, smelling, taste, touch, auditory. And don't forget, the insula is almost like a sense as well, right? Because you close your eyes and are you floating on your bed? So we'll call that the sixth sense. So with these senses, remember, we're taking in information. So what happens now is I'm walking through the alley, the street, whatever it may be, and I've been traumatized before, is that now my senses, instead of how they were before, they were like dimmers. They had a spectrum to them. They had a sound, a smell, a touch, a taste, sensory-wise. They had dials onto them. But now that I've experienced that trauma, my senses almost turn into, instead of dimmers, light switches. Now it's either on or off. There's no in between. So as I'm walking through the street, the alley, whatever it may be that traumatized me before, my senses now are like light switches. It's not like maybe on, maybe off. Now it's like I smell something that I smelled in that moment, flick on. I see something that reminds me of that, boom. I kind of hear somebody go, hey, Sean, what's up? Boom. Somebody yelled at me last time and said, hey, Sean. So now with these things firing and going off, if enough of the switches get on, I am no longer present in the moment. Now the hologram and the projection from the past, boom, it's in front of me. And now my perception of what happened in the past, the hologram, versus what is really happening right now in the moment is blurred. I can no longer separate reality in this moment from what happened in the past because I don't have dimmers anymore. I have light switches. Boom, boom, boom. Once enough of those are on, the brain anticipates and goes, I know what's going on. That's happening again. Sean, boom, remember this? This is what's happening right now. But I'm not getting mugged right now. I'm not getting robbed. But your brain anticipates it. So now I react to my truth, the hologram, which has become real. I no longer can separate fact and opinion, emotion from logic. What's kind of going on? It gets blurred together and it hijacks my brain. And I respond by running, maybe freezing up, having a panic attack, feeling anxious. I might respond by somebody touching me on the shoulder who's a friend and I'm in that same part of the town. I might respond by throwing an elbow or a punch or whatever it is. But I know this person, but my brain no longer can see what is happening in the moment. It can only see what's being projected and it's being told what to believe. All because the amygdala has taken over. I'm impulsive. I need to survive. Take what happened in the past. Anticipate that it's most likely going to happen again. Assume it. Boom. There it is. Another analogy by an author of a book called Rewire Your Anxious Brain, Dr. Catherine M. Pittman. What they have another great analogy of is the way that we react to anxiety, which I'm kind of utilizing it for trauma, but the way that we react to anxiety can be also shown as, an example, you're driving your car and you have your navigation system on. The navigation system is kind of helping you get from your point A to your destination. So let's say as you're driving your car and you have your navigation system on, you decide to take a detour, a restroom stop, get yourself some coffee, something to eat, refresh, stretch your legs, whatever it may be. Well, that navigation system starts firing. It starts going off course, get back on right, rerouting, U-turn. It starts yelling at you. You, as being the driver in the car, are aware that you know where you're going. You're okay. You're safe. That navigation system, Dr. Catherine M. Pittman, great example, says that is kind of like your amygdala. Your amygdala is firing and telling you to be fearful, frightened about something going on. But the prefrontal cortex, you driving your car, being able to see right now in this moment, you're okay. Nothing is happening. Keep driving. Keep doing your thing. Pull over to the side, do your thing. But more importantly is that amygdala, navigation that's firing, trying to reroute you, and you know you're okay, sooner or later, if you get through the yelling of it and the noise, it goes beep, beep, reroute, and it calms itself. That is the difficult part of when trauma happens to us. It's getting through those moments and that space of the anxiety and that fear to rewire and reroute the brain so that the insula, the insula cortex, the emotion regulation part of the brain can rewire itself. So the amygdala can quiet itself. The prefrontal cortex can step in more. Our brain kind of can level itself out and stop giving so much power to that navigation of that amygdala that's firing and telling us something is wrong. Driving your car, you can clearly see you're okay. Ignoring the navigation system, getting through that space of anxiety, space of possibly the triggers, the traumas, then it rewires itself. Easier said than done, but I just wanted to give that because I thought it was a beautiful analogy Dr. Catherine M. Pittman provides for us. So just a couple other things to mention about when trauma happens is we talked about a little bit how trauma turns our gray areas, our ability to kind of turn a dial, dimmers into light switches. It's either on or off. We talked about the navigation system that Dr. Catherine M. Pittman discusses. But another couple of things to just talk about trauma and stuff like that is that when trauma happens, whether we're talking about attachments, whether we're talking about grief and loss, whether we talk about natural disasters, housing, whatever that might look like, is it's almost like a part of you gets frozen in that time and the rest of you keeps moving forward. So it's almost like a disconnect that happens. So what I mean by that is in the sense of healing from traumas, sometimes what we do is we integrate, we process. We bring back these two sides of the brain that might have disconnected when the trauma happened. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. You don't talk to me. Every person for themselves, we split. So healing from the trauma is bringing these together. Healing from the trauma is bringing this together, the body and the mind. Healing from the trauma is this, as well as your relation to the environment outside of yourself and connecting all of these things. So it's difficult to do at times, especially when the moment this gets zapped, zip, zoop, we have the triggers happen. We have the memory come back. We have the amygdala take over and go, no, remember this? So when trauma happens, we leave a little part of ourselves behind. So we're not congruent anymore. We kind of had to keep moving forward. So an attachment style that might look like leaving our childhood behind and not fully engaging with that side of ourselves. In other avenues, it might look like a trauma happened to me at a certain age of mine, a certain stage of my life, and it almost created a disconnect where my memories in that stage get blurred. Another thing to also continue about with trauma is that we talk about not just the mind remembering it, but also remember the insula, your relation to things, your body also remembers it. So it's not has to be like a rule of thumb, but I just want to mention that sometimes it even takes a year to process a moment that trauma occurred. What I mean by that is when trauma occurs, sometimes it's like dust gets kicked up. So before we even start the healing process or before we even start understanding what happened with the trauma, we might want to hang back and wait for the dust to settle a little bit so that we know now what we're kind of dealing with. This is an example we sometimes give as mental health professionals when let's say you're on your way to my office, or you're on the way to a visitation to see a mental health professional, and you almost get in a car accident, or let's say you're just going to go see a friend and you almost get in a car accident and so forth. And then you get there, if you talk to your friend and you go, wow, you won't believe what happened. I almost got in a car accident. In that moment, you're still in what we call like shock. So your friend might turn and go, oh, no big deal, carry on. Or your friend might turn and go, oh my, wow, what happened? Oh, and based upon someone's reaction to your unprocessed trauma, you can kind of get further picked up on that. Oh, I didn't think it was a big deal. Maybe it is a big deal. I'm not too sure what's going on. So generally what we say when we talk about that, let the dust settle after moments happen. So a natural disaster occurs. We don't necessarily rush in immediately to process what's going on. Grief and loss happens. We want to give it a beat, a moment, take a deep breath. We kind of say it might take a year. It's not a rule of thumb, but a year, because we say you have to go through the different seasons, the different relationships that you have, the different, because just like Mother Nature, we have seasons as well, right? We have highs and lows. So we kind of get a cycle kind of going to that. So sometimes we might say that let the dust settle before we process it. Doesn't mean that it's not impacting you already. And that's not always the case to wait that long. But sometimes when trauma occurs, we want to take a deep breath and give ourselves a moment before we engage. For more information on that, I would say reach out to a therapist, engage with yourself. You can keep processing it also by writing, by thinking about it as well. But once it's gotten to the point where we start noticing that the trauma is closing us off and it's going in this direction, it's a good chance or an opportunity to seek some help so that we can expand it back again. Because trauma, let's say, for example, I'm afraid of flying, I'm afraid of heights. One sort of fear can overtake my life where sooner or later I really do get more closed off, and now I'm very much limiting myself. So that's what happens with trauma. Trauma, boom, something happens and you kind of go, well, that's kind of interesting. I don't know how nope, can't make it. Oop, now you're not doing anything. So give yourself a moment when trauma happens, but be insightful and aware that once the space starts closing in, once you become more and more avoidant, once you become a fear is really kind of directing us instead of our balanced brain, that's our notion to seek some help. Nothing wrong with getting help at any stage of the trauma. Trained professionals will be able to kind of engage in that degree and kind of help you as you continue your journey. Just a side note, when a trauma, like let's say, for example, a grief and loss happens as well, your body obviously stores that, so does your mind. So sometimes when trauma happens, and let's say, for example, it's a year, 2 years, 3 years later, and let's say we feel that in here we fully process the trauma, sometimes anniversaries and so forth can still kind of trigger something in us. So our mood can still kind of feel low or dysregulated on anniversaries where we kind of go, I woke up today and I don't feel that great. Nothing's really happened. Not really sure. Yesterday was a great day. I have some things to look forward to today. It might be something that happened a year, 2 years ago, on or around that same time, that your body's kind of going, still kind of squeezing it out, still kind of processing it a little bit. So just a little side note for us to be mindful about. So how do we really kind of heal from trauma? How we kind of heal from trauma, and again, I would say check in with your psychiatrist, your physicians, your mental health experts, your psychologist, your therapist, and so forth. But generally speaking, the way that we kind of heal from the trauma is by integrating different parts of our bodies, but more importantly, just like muscle training, being able to sit with the anxiety and the fearfulness for longer and longer periods of time so that we can override the system, so we can kind of punch through the wood, not just contact the wood. If I am just healing with my trauma by just contacting the wood, I'm not healing. If anything, I'm actually kind of hurting my hand more every time I touch it. But if I'm able to push through it, that's how we heal from the trauma. So what I mean by that is, and again, talk to your psychiatrist, talk to your physicians and so forth. But at times, sometimes medications can help with that. So we sometimes have a medication that helps us get through our anxious moments, kind of helps us with those senses, not feel so overwhelmed by them, but kind of understand and feel them, but not to so much of a degree. So medication sometimes helps change those light switches back to dimmers. We talk about it because a lot of times the trauma that's happened, we have a memory of it, which is not the entire story of it. And every time we reflect back on that memory of it, it becomes more and more strong. What I mean by that is in our heads. But if we talk about that out loud, we can have a trained professional test or kind of challenge in a very chill way. What else happened after that? What are some other examples of this and so forth to help guide us to go, oh, that was just one slither of the story. There's more to it. And now by looking at the entirety of it, I can focus on goods and bads and not just the bad moments. And that helps me kind of heal as well. So medications help, talking about it helps, but pretty much sitting in that uncomfortableness or that anxiety and knowing that we are safe. So basically, exposure therapy is what's going to be the most powerful thing. Sometimes people do this with EMDR. Talk to your local therapist, your psychologist who's EMDR trained about that. Sometimes they do it with that. Sometimes we do it with medications. Again, talking about it. There's art therapy. There's music therapy. There's different types of therapy depending on your feeling for it that helps us overall expose ourselves to it, heal through it, and sit with the anxiety more and that fearful response while telling ourselves and knowing that we're in a safe space. So what trauma kind of does to us sometimes is that it gives us an emotion. And over time, we're comforted by that emotion. And we look to it more and more and more. But we lose sight of all the other emotions in there too. So that's kind of like very vaguely, but generally how we kind of heal from trauma. But again, talk to professionals around you to get a more custom treatment plan for yourself. That's our video for today. As mentioned earlier in the video, it was just a general bird's eye view of what trauma possibly can look like, the parts of the brain that get impacted, healing from trauma, and some different analogies for how trauma impacts us. As always, appreciate everyone out there watching. If you like the video, thank you so much.